We are now embarking on the truly historical part of Egyptian history, the era covered by written sources. However, please keep in mind that we are dealing with the 3rd millennium BC. We are starting around the 31st or 30th century BC. That was 5,000 years ago, and the preservation of many sources is, frankly, lousy. For example, we might have a description of a specific year, the year we organized a great hunt, or the year we killed hippos, or the year the king went and thrashed Nubia. That's great, but these records, like the Palermo stone, are fragmentary. We often find ourselves in a situation where we know a lot about a specific period because it fell into a visible fragment. But then immediately after we have to say, sorry, we have no idea what happened next because there is simply no interpretation available. The further we move through the dynasties, the more information becomes available and the potential error in dating decreases. At the beginning of our story, we have a margin of error of about 100 to 120 years. But as we approach the year 2000 BC, this gap shrinks. By the time we reach the Middle Kingdom around 1990 BC, we know dates with an accuracy of almost a single year. But in the 3rd millennium, dates will float, so please don't be too pedantic about them. There will be some inaccuracies. We need to address the constant jumping between Egyptian and Greek names. For a long time, our main sources were Greeks like Herodotus and Manetho, who renamed the cities and gods in their own way. But now we have far more Egyptian sources. We read their texts, find their stales, and see their seals. The trend now is to move from Greek names to Egyptian ones. In older literature, you see Heracleopolis. In new literature, you meet Nechen. Earlier they wrote Heliopolis, now we hear Unu. You might know the Pyramid of Khafre, but now you're more likely to see Khafre. We will try to use Egyptian names, but the confusion persists, so you will hear both. Since we are doing a series on Egypt, here is the breakdown. We have the early dynastic period, 1st and 2nd dynasties, then the Old Kingdom, the Age of Pyramids, followed by the Middle Kingdom, and finally the New Kingdom, the imperial phase with Ramses, Akhenaten, and Tutankhamun. Most of what general audiences know, the golden masks, the intricate statues, comes from the New Kingdom, when Egypt was a true empire, controlling Syria and beyond. But remember, Egypt is the longest-lasting civilization in history. It spans 3,000 years of continuous cultural tradition. During this time, the language changed dramatically. At the start of the Old Kingdom, they didn't write complex texts, they barely used verb forms. But by the 5th dynasty, we get the pyramid texts, serious literature capable of conveying complex meaning. Around 3000 BC, small confederations of tribes began to organize in the Nile Valley. The climate was drying up, forcing people from the savannah, where they used to hunt elephants and giraffes, to cluster closer to the Nile. Interestingly, huge cities didn't form in Egypt the way they did in Mesopotamia. In Mesopotamia, you had massive urban centers like Uruk and Babylon rise suddenly. In Egypt, to build a huge city, you would have to move too far from the Nile. So people hugged the river. Instead of city-states, we got a system of nomes, essentially a continuous chain of villages stretching along the riverbanks. This is the Copper Stone Age. They didn't have tin, so bronze was incredibly rare, rarer than gold. They used copper, but mostly they relied on stone. The Egyptians viewed the sea, which they called the Great Green, as something hostile. They were river people. The boat is central to Egyptian history. The Nile is their road and artery. However, the Nile didn't breed great sailors because it's a predictable, easy river. You make a raft of reeds, hoist a sail, and off you go. They traveled the river constantly, but rarely ventured far into the open sea. Unlike rivers in China or India, the Nile's flooding was strictly predictable. Every year on July 20th, Sirius would rise, and the next day the water would rise. This allowed for perfect planning. The flood brought rich minerals from the Ethiopian highlands, fertilizing the land. Since they mostly grew barley and wheat, the economy was simple. Everything was calculated in bread and beer. Taxes were paid in bread and beer. This was the foundation of Egyptian nutrition. Closer to 3000 BC, boat gangs began to appear, representatives of villages gathering under chieftains and totems. These chieftains rose to power, and their authority became absolute. This is crucial for understanding the pharaohs. Strictly speaking, the word pharaoh is a later invention from the New Kingdom, but we use it because we are used to it. Egypt was isolated, deserts on the left, deserts to the right, cannibals to the south, and the sea to the north. It was a natural cradle where they could sit comfortably, isolated from the world. Because they didn't have rival city-states like Mesopotamia, Egypt never knew anything other than despotism. The early rulers were considered the literal incarnation of the god Horus. They didn't just communicate with gods. The main cult in Egypt was the cult of the pharaoh himself. People prayed to him. We see this in the Heb-Sed festival, a jubilee where the pharaoh proved his potency by running a race and performing feats of strength. If you celebrated a Heb-Sed, you were considered practically immortal. Life was hard. Average life expectancy was around 30, so a pharaoh living to 50 or 60 was seen as a god. Pepi II, for instance, allegedly reigned for 94 years. Why did they build such massive tombs? Because of the concept of the Ka. The Ka is a double. Right now, as you watch this, your double is sitting inside you watching it too. When you die, your double stands up and continues to exist. The ancient Egyptians solved the paradox of death this way. A person dies, but their elusive double continues to exist. The tomb, the mummy, the statues, the paintings, they are all anchors to keep the Ka in existence. When they put food in the tomb, they didn't expect the dead body to eat it. They expected the double of the food to be eaten by the double of the person. The false doors in tombs that lead nowhere, they are for the Ka, who can walk through walls to enter the afterlife. Around 3100 BC, a confederation from the city of Thinis, led by the worshippers of Horus, began to unify Egypt. This is the unification of Upper Egypt, the falcon, and Lower Egypt, the cobra. The first dynasty rulers like Hor-Aha were buried with immense wealth. In Hor-Aha's tomb, despite copper being rare, they found hundreds of copper tools, saws, knives, needles. But for the common people, it was still the Stone Age, using flint knives and sickles. This period was brutal. In the first dynasty, we see mass human sacrifice. In Hor-Aha's tomb alone, there were 318 bodies. These weren't just prisoners, they were young courtiers strangled to accompany the king. It made sense to them. If you serve the boss in life, you serve him in death. However, abruptly at the start of the second dynasty, human sacrifice stopped completely. We don't know why, but perhaps they realized it was a waste of valuable personnel. The second dynasty is mysterious. We know little, but something strange happened around 2700 BC, possibly a civil war. Traditionally, all pharaohs took a Horus name, the falcon. Suddenly, a pharaoh named Peribsen appears, and he takes a Seth name. Instead of a falcon, his crest features the animal of Seth, the god of chaos and deserts. Later, Pharaoh Hasekemwi appears with both a falcon and a Seth animal on his crest, implying he crushed a rebellion and reunified the land. Around 2650 BC, the third dynasty begins with Pharaoh Djoser. He moved the capital permanently to Memphis, located exactly at the junction of Upper and Lower Egypt. But the real star of this era isn't the pharaoh, it's a commoner named Imhotep. He held titles like High Priest of Heliopolis and Chief of the Great Palace. He was the first vizier, prime minister. Imhotep is famous for a revolutionary idea. He took a mastaba, a flat rectangular tomb, and stacked another smaller one on top of it, then another and another. He created the step pyramid. It was the first pyramid in history. It's essentially a pile of mastabas. This was a massive leap forward. It required organizing labor, logistics, and materials on a scale never seen before. Interestingly, after Djoser and Imhotep died, the Egyptians struggled to repeat this success for a while. They built smaller pyramids or failed attempts until the arrival of the Fourth Dynasty.
Around 2650 BC, Pharaoh Huni makes one last, almost desperate attempt to build a pyramid, but it fails. They couldn't replicate the success of Imhotep. They tried to make smaller versions or failed structures until the arrival of the Fourth Dynasty. The Fourth Dynasty begins around the 26th century BC, and this is the true age of pyramid building. It starts with Pharaoh Sneferu, the father of Khufu, Cheops, who built the Great Pyramid. Sneferu is unique because he is the only pharaoh in history to build 3 massive pyramids for himself. His first attempt was in Maat. He tried to turn an existing step pyramid into a true-sided one, but he failed. The whole thing collapsed. Sneferu learned from this failure. He discovered that the desert sand, especially after rains, was causing the massive structure to settle and fail. He then moved to the Dasher Plateau, a solid bedrock, and began his second pyramid. Halfway through the build, the engineers realized the base was too narrow and the immense weight would cause a structural failure. To save the project, they suddenly changed the angle of the sides, creating the famous bent pyramid. Still dissatisfied, he immediately started his third project, the Red Pyramid. By this point, they had mastered the engineering, and it was a perfect, true-sided pyramid. Sneferu's son, Khufu, Cheops, continued this monumental building effort by erecting the Great Pyramid of Giza. This was not a one-time project, but a stable tradition that was repeated with every pharaoh. The sheer scale of it required a completely new level of organization. The building process evolved quickly. They moved from using small stone blocks to massive blocks weighing several tons. The transportation system relied heavily on the Nile, with most blocks being ferried by boat and then hauled into place. This was incredibly hard labor, requiring synchronization from large teams. Imagine 15 to 20 people pulling a single large block. Inside these massive structures, a major innovation was the development of the relieving chamber. Engineers needed a way to protect the burial chamber from the million tons of rock resting above it. They designed a special type of masonry to redistribute the load, preventing the chamber from being crushed. To figure this out in the 26th century BC required immense intellectual and engineering capability. For centuries, the myth, largely popularized by Herodotus, was that slaves built the pyramids. However, modern excavations of the pyramid cities at Giza show a completely different picture. The workers were highly skilled specialists, well-fed and well-organized. The diet found in the workers' city was rich in meat and high-quality bread, not the rations of forced labor. The pharaoh did impose a form of mandatory corvée labor, but this was a civic duty during the Nile flood season, when farming was impossible. Since the pharaoh was a god and the Nile flood was dictated by him, he was entitled to a portion of everyone's time, measured in man days. These people were not slaves. They were citizens contributing to the divine order of the state. They even left names and competitive graffiti on the inner blocks, such as Khufu's Friends Gang or Menkare's Drunks, suggesting pride and camaraderie. The massive cost and effort had a profound philosophical meaning, maintaining Maat, the Egyptian concept of cosmic order, truth, and justice. The Egyptians believed that the world, though created in order, constantly threatens to slide back into Isfet, chaos. The pharaoh, as the living incarnation of Horus, was the only one who could maintain Maat. Every ritual, every military expedition, and every building project was an act of fighting chaos. Even going to war against Nubia was framed as fighting living dead, who represent chaos and injustice, to restore order. The pyramid was the ultimate anchor for the pharaoh's Ka, his spirit double. By ensuring the pharaoh's eternal existence, they guaranteed the continuation of Maat, keeping the Nile running, the seasons turning, and the world from dissolving into chaos. The need for highly organized specialists, inspectors, organizers, delivery managers, food accountants, created a massive, powerful bureaucracy. In the early dynasties, all high officials were directly related to the pharaoh. By the 5th and 6th dynasties, they were career administrators. This centralization of power eventually weakened the pharaoh. Officials called nomarchs gained local power and began building their own tombs and establishing dynastic titles, moving away from the pharaoh's direct control. The construction of giant pyramids stops, while the quality of art, internal decoration, and funerary texts, like the pyramid texts, increase exponentially. For centuries, the final straw came during the incredibly long 67-year reign of Pepi II, by Manetho 94 years. His rule was so long that the central authority simply dissolved around him. Then, around 2200 BC, a catastrophe struck, the 4.2 kiloyear event. This was a global mega-drought, a catastrophic climate change that coincided with other global cooling cycles. This event collapsed nearly every known civilization of the time. In Egypt, the Nile floods became erratic and unpredictable. The agricultural and logistical systems, the very foundation of Maat, were destroyed. The collapse was total. In the deserts, settlements were abandoned forever. Nubians and Libyans, suffering from the drought, invaded. The carefully constructed logistics, which brought in goods from Sinai and the Levant, ground to a halt. The entire centralized system dissolved. In just 20 years, 17 pharaohs quickly replaced one another. The Old Kingdom was over, and Egypt descended into its first dark age, the First Intermediate Period.